Hi everybody. As he said, my name is Daniel Caduff. I'm coming from the Rätoromanic part of Switzerland, so that's why some people here in the French part have some difficulties with pronouncing my name. That's easy. I'm a federal guy, and it feels pretty good to hold a presentation without tie and in sneakers once again. So from time to time I have this opportunity. Thanks for having me. I was told to have an hour to explain you a little bit about what we do in the Federal Office for National Economic Supply concerning prevention against cyber risks. And I want this to have as much as possible as a discussion with you guys, because you are the experts in it. So we will probably not use all the full hour of my presentation, which gives you the chance to interrupt me at any time if you want me to answer questions within the presentation or to focus a little bit more on a certain issue which is for interest of you. Don't hesitate. I'm Danny, so just call me Danny and ask me whatever you want to know. First of all, you may wonder yourself maybe a little bit, what is this guy from the Federal Office for National Economic Supply doing here at the Insomni'hack conference? Well, there's a mandate in the Swiss constitution that demands from the state that we shall ensure that the country is supplied with essential goods and services. This is very generic, but the essential goods and services are also for the ICT services, for example, telecommunication networks on the one side, and on the other side, ICT is a very, very necessary resource for almost anything critical in our country, from food to medical to electricity supply and so on. Nothing of these things would work without ICT nowadays. So the Constitution gives us a mandate to secure those critical infrastructures. And I will tell you a little bit how we are organized and how we are working in the Swiss Confederation on cyber risks, because it may look a little bit complicated on the first sight, as we are very federated as Switzerland is. So we have several offices working on several issues, and it may not be clear on first sight who is really doing what and why are these people doing this. So I try to get a little bit more deeper into that confusion, and hopefully we'll resolve it for you. So the organization of FONES is like that we have several divisions. We have the food division, the energy division, the healthcare division, logistics, industry, and ICT. So these are the six critical, what we call it in the Constitution of Switzerland, the six critical sectors. Energy, for example, consists then of various subsectors. For example, electricity, but also natural gas, power, mineral oil, and so on. So from these six sectors, we're coming in totally to 28 subsectors. For example, in the healthcare sector, there's the hospitals on one side, but there's also the production of medical stuff, the import of vaccination and stuff like that. So these are different subsectors in the health sector. Myself, I am the head of the ICT division. So what we are doing in our division, we are first of all securing the ICT infrastructure in Switzerland, which means we're talking basically the telecommunication infrastructure. But on the other hand, we are also responsible to secure ICT as a critical resource for all the other six sectors. This is how we are organized, because we are a pretty complicated office. We have only 35 people working on the state side on the office, but then we have a private sector. We call it the Miliz system, which is something very typically Swiss. We have 250 people from the private sector providing us with their knowledge. Because I know quite some bit about ICT, but I'm not an expert in the production of medicals, for example. I have no idea how that works. So I need deep dive knowledge from the healthcare sector, for example, to understand what their risks and their needs are concerning ICT infrastructure. So I need to know their risks, their core businesses, their processes, to be able to ensure their processes against any type of cyber risks. This is why the organization of our office is like that. We have 250 people from the private sector providing us with knowledge. And therefore, coming from my first call to action, we want to let this grow. So, yes, you're welcome. Yes, it's on a volunteer base. All those people, those 250 people helping us in the private sector, they are mandated by the Confederation. So basically you get elected, but on usually it's somebody of the existing members, or we get in contact with other peoples also on conferences, and they show us their interest to be willing to provide us with their insight. Then the Confederation or the government basically will elect you on the next year, for example. But you can't make much money out of it. So it's really, you get a diploma saying that you're working for the federal office if it's okay for you. So we're coming to the supply model, which is what I tried to explain before. You see, these are again the sectors that we're talking it by not mentioning the subsectors. But what you may see here is ICT is a sector, a critical sector within Switzerland itself, if we're talking the telecommunication networks basically, but it is also a resource. So we have resources that are necessary to make our energy supply work. There's no distribution of power in the electric grid without computer or SCADA systems that work on the sensor data that they are collecting from the system. So without ICT, there's no energy supply in Switzerland, no electricity supply, say it like that. There's a very huge cross-interdependency between energy supply and ICT, because without energy, we have pretty sure no ICT after a certain time. After all those short battery lifetimes, it's not really working without energy. And yeah, we may have diesel, but even that is not working for all the time. So what we're trying to do is both. We are securing the ICT critical sector, and we're trying to secure ICT as a resource for all the other critical infrastructures. So this is what phone does. But all of you know, cybersecurity is a lot more than that. And now we're coming to the distributed responsibility in the area of cyber within the Federation. Because we are not the only one taking care about cyber risks in the broader understanding of cyber risk. We have three main duties in the Federation, which are separated among various offices. We have, first of all, the cyber defense part, which is the duty of the army and the intelligence service. So they are defending ourselves against nation-state risks and are also providing us all involved participants with the inside knowledge from the intelligence community. Then we have the cyber crime department, which is the responsibility of the Federal Department of Police and Jurisdiction. So those are the guys that are really going, for example, after child pornography, drug trafficking in the darknet and stuff like that. So they are against crimes that may occur in real life as well. Child pornography, drug trafficking, these are crimes that happen in the real world. Cyber is the tool to commit those crimes. So this is the responsibility of the Federal Office for Jurisdiction and Police. And then we have the third circle, which is the cybersecurity circle, which is basically to secure civil infrastructure. The Army and the Intelligence Service, they are there to defend military risks and military infrastructures. The cybersecurity officers, as we are responsible for all the civil infrastructure in Switzerland, like power plant, like water transportation system, like production sites for medicaments, and so on and so on. And we are various offices who work together hand in hand. But as you may see, those three circles, they are overlapping. And this is not just for the benefit of the beauty of the graphic, but also it has a certain meaning behind it. It says, we are working together. Because, of course, certain cybercrime stuff that you may go after in the darknet may also affect civil infrastructure, for example. If you're talking about the distribution of malware that can be used by attackers trying to get ransom for private persons, which is a crime if you think about sextortion, but you can use the same malware as well to attack a critical infrastructure with ransomware, which is then a national security incident. So those three circles, we are separated if you're talking like the legal base of our action and our work, but in the daily business, we closely work together like hand in hand. So we have an organizational separation, and but a close cooperation in the daily business. What I want to explain you now a little bit is the National Cyber Strategy, which was developed by the Federal Council in 2012, or adopted in 2012, for the protection of Switzerland against cyber risks. It's very generic. Again, it's against all type of cyber risks, against data loss, manipulation of data, privacy risks, whatever. And this National Cyber Strategy was conducted by various different entities of the Swiss Federation as well. So we had like the army doing their type of stuff of work against military risks. We were doing vulnerability analysis in the civil cyber security field. Then we had people concerning about privacy breaches, GDPR, and all that kind of stuff. So we were all working together. We, in fact, conducted 13 vulnerability analyses in critical supply sectors. All of them are classified, so we're not giving them out. But for you, I think they are not that funny at all anyway, because these were not vulnerability analysis as you would conduct it. There were not vulnerability analysis on a technical level. So the question, the driving question for us was not, how can we penetrate a certain firewall? But the question was, how could a cyber risk on that critical infrastructure affect Switzerland? So we were on a more generic-based question. We were more looking about the risk for the country and not really looking on the vulnerabilities, speaking on a technical level for a machine. This is an example of one of those vulnerability analyses we did. This is one of the food supply. It's in German. The question, as I tried to explain, was never, how can we penetrate this firewall? Just to give you an example. That would be a technical vulnerability analysis, penetration testing, that we need you guys to do it, or also the guys in Melanie working with us. But it's not the perspective that we at FONES have, because we are more into securing the country than securing a certain element of a network. The question that we are driven by is, how does this cyber risk affect the critical supply process in Switzerland? Give you an example. What happens if an attacker may manipulate the SCADA system of Migros or Coop? This would affect the distribution of food in Switzerland pretty heavily. So is this a question about cybersecurity if you're looking at the SCADA system, or is it a problem for Switzerland if you're talking food provision? It's for you to decide. Some of the findings that we had by analyzing this sector, it was a very heterogeneous sector with many different players. Some of them were already fully automated. They were like using end-to-end process from the production site until the final sales point in the point of sale at the cashier. So every time somebody paid something at the cashier at the point of sales, it was scanned by the scanner, and this scanning process then started a whole process of billing on the backside, going back onto production. Because they knew, okay, we sold so many items of this product this day, which means we will have to restock our stocks with that amount of production by next week, which means we should start producing them tomorrow. And on the other side, you have like producers that are almost not automated yet, that have not really understood what type of cyber risks they're facing to. There we had a lot to do with awareness and sensibilization. For example, what do you think happens if the major vendor of cow milk robots is affected with malware? We're going to start killing thousands of cows a few days later in Switzerland, because we are in Switzerland incapable right now to milk all those cows and sheep that we have manually. We just don't have enough persons who can do that. So we need milking robots to assist us. If those milking robots do not work anymore, for whatever reason, if they're affected from any type of malware or whatever, we cannot milk the cows anymore, which will then result in emergency slaughtering. If you have seen the movie blackout produced by the Swiss television at the end of last year, there was one scene where they went pretty close to that. They were talking about the cows, and they were talking about the problems, what happens if the milking robot does not work anymore. And then at the end of the scene, you just saw a little smoke upon a hill, but you didn't saw what happens in between. So this is just one graphic example of how ICT is affecting our food supply today. And the same type of risks do also affect any other critical infrastructure sector. The same is true for the production of medicaments or the control of medical instruments in the hospital. What do you think about a heart pump, a lung pump, or any sensor type based medication which will measure your concentration of a certain amount of blood, how many oxygen you have in your blood? And based on that sensor data, the machine will do something. So that sensor data should be reliable. Otherwise, the machine would probably do something that you don't like. What we also find out, coming back to the vulnerability analysis, just an example in the food supply, is that the distribution, this is nowadays, is way more vulnerable than the production. So the production can often be controlled manually as well, or it can be interrupted. But the distribution today is just in time based, basically. It's any interruption in the distribution will interrupt the cooling chain, for example, and will then result in rotting food in the shops, in the magazines. So ICT is a risk for the distribution of food in our country. If this is a cyber risk, or if this is a risk for the provision of the country's well-being, is among discussion. We call it a cyber risk. This cyber threat is a risk for our national security coming to food provision. So, what do? We developed a lot of measures, technical measures, political measures, awareness measures, education for people, schooling. We were talking to vendors. We were trying to code batches for known vulnerabilities, and so on and so on. We did a lot. But what we first found out is that it's always better to prevent yourself against the risk and to clear up the mess after. So you better don't make the mess, first of all. And that way we tried to establish a pretty simple, generic ICT minimum standard in Switzerland, which is not mandatory. This is a tool that we provide, which can be used for any user in Switzerland. It focuses primarily on critical infrastructures, but it's generic and can basically be used by any organization, company, or even private person to secure their IT processes. For those of you familiar with international cybersecurity frameworks, this won't be anything too new. It's based on the international NIST framework, which was adapted a little bit for the specific needs of Switzerland. We also added some information that we thought would be helpful for understanding the way of thinking of cybersecurity from a federal perspective. But nevertheless, it's fully compatible with all type of other industry standards like ISO standards, COBIT, ITIL standards, or whatever you know or whatever you are used to use in your company. What do we try to reach? What is our goal with these standards? Basically, generically said again, it's to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of all your data at all time. Which is very generic. I tell you why. For example, an avalanche or a flood can affect a data center, which will then breach the availability of your data. You had a fire in your data center, your data cannot be accessed. Was this fire a cyber risk? We don't care. For us, the risk is to lose one of those three. If we are losing the availability to access our data, we're having a problem. If we're losing the availability to be absolutely sure that the data that must be confidential can be held confidential, then we have a problem. We are facing a lack of trust. People won't trust us anymore if they cannot be sure that their confidential information will be confidential also in the future and has been in the past. And last but not least, integrity of data, which is one of the risks which is becoming more and more and more important for us. If you're thinking about, are you familiar with SCADA systems, more or less? Who is? Okay, I will explain to the others later. SCADA systems, basically, they're collecting data from sensors and do then, based on this sensor data, fulfill certain actions. We do need these SCADA systems on a large scale, for example, in the distribution of electricity in Switzerland. There are thousands of sensors in the Swiss electricity grid that, for example, that measure certain types, the amount of power going to a certain point of the grid at a certain time. And based on this sensor data, Swissgrid, the Swiss net operating company, will always exchange power from places where there is too much electricity at a certain given time to other places in the network where there is not enough electricity at this time. So the system does always have to be balanced. If it's not balanced, you will have fires, which is not good. Or you have power outages, which is not good either. So this is a risk that really is affecting us more and more, the risks on the integrity of data, because it's very, very hard to detect as well. Or as I said, if you think about medical devices that do measure your heart rate, and built on your heart rate, they give you an electric shock, so you won't die. But if they measure the wrong heart rate, they will give you the wrong type of shock, which will affect in you dying. So the integrity of this data measured by these sensors is essential for any ICT processes that are built on this sensor data. So from our understanding, if we can guarantee those three things, data that must be confidential is confidential, data that we rely on, we can prove the integrity of this data, so it's the correct value measured and transported and delivered, and we can ensure the availability of all those systems and all those data at any time we need it. Nevertheless, if we're talking a hacking attack or a fire, because both of it can affect availability, but both of it can also be addressed with the same measure, redundancy. So if you have two data centers, it doesn't really matter if one is hacked or if one is burned down. As long as you have a redundant data center which can take over the job smoothly and seamlessly, it doesn't matter if it was a hacker or a fire. You have ensured the availability of your data. And that's our generic perspective of cybersecurity that we try to establish. You should always just think about those three things. Make confidential what has to be confidential, ensure the integrity of data, and ensure the availability. Of course, making something confidential does mean, for example, you should think about your access policy. Just to give you one example. To be sure to make something available at the time you need it, you should think about your backup process, and you should think about redundancy. So this is not as easy done as it looks like on this very nice slide. There's a lot of work behind guaranteeing the availability of all your essential data at any time you need it. How do we do that? So we have three goals that we want to achieve. Integrity, availability, and confidentiality or privacy. Those are the three goals that we want to achieve. How do we do that? So the standard that I just presented, I have a few examples with me, just come by if you want one after the presentation, is divided in 5 chapters, which for those of you who are familiar with the NIST framework, again, this is not new for you. In the first chapter, it's all about identification. It means you should identify what you have and what you rely on. What are your critical IT processes? On what machines are those processes executed? What kind of software do you need to execute those processes? On which virtual instance of which physical blade server in which of your data center is this process? Because if this process is affected by a hacking attack, let's say Saturday morning, 3 a.m. This is a pretty common time for hacking attacks. Hacking attacks usually don't happen during office times. They happen 3 o'clock in the morning. So if you're facing a hacking attack on one of your critical systems Saturday morning, 3 a.m., and you cannot say precisely which of your physical servers is hosting that process at that time, you will lose just another half an hour up to an hour just to find out where do I have to go to? Which machine do I have to turn down? So identification is always something you need to do before. You lose too much time if you have to identify your system and your critical resources at the moment of an attack. Do this before. And also, for example, if you don't know what type of software versions you're running, let's think about a new zero-day vulnerability pops up. You are running, I don't know, 50 virtual instances of servers in your data center and 300 clients. You don't know which one of these clients is affected because you haven't really documented the versions of the software that those clients run. You're pretty sure you don't know what you do. You don't know if this security risk is a risk for you. And then you start doing in the research, you start doing investigating. You do like malware research on those clients. But again, it would have been better to do it before. So document what kind of process you are using. Document what type of physical hardware you have, what type of virtualization you have. Document all the versions of software, all the serial numbers, all the access codes, and also the data stream to external partners that you rely on. If you need external data to fulfill your business, you should talk to the vendor or provider of that external data. But once this external data is affected, your business may be torn down. And maybe you don't want that. So identify is something that you could start today, or you have better started doing it yesterday. Then the second chapter is all about protection. This is what most people do understand if we're talking cybersecurity. So if you talk to a private person, not to a pro like here in this room, what they think about cybersecurity, they will come up with something like, yeah, I have antivirus software and I have a firewall and stuff like that. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, you're protected. No, of course you're not, but this is what all this chapter is all about. So it's protective technology, the establishment of password rules, the establishment of multi-factor authentication, the establishment of heuristic data analysis, stuff like that. Antivirus software, firewalls, intrusion detection management systems, all that stuff is here in that chapter of protection. The third part is about detection. How do I realize I have been affected by a cyber risk? That does really much differ from what kind of risk we're talking. If you have a fire in your data center, you will most likely realize it pretty soon. If your core systems are affected by ransomware, you will most likely realize it too. But it's too late then. But you can realize it. But what happens if you're a victim of some espionage activities? Somebody trying to steal your business secrets or trying to establish a backdoor for later reason because he or her just wants to have access at the time he or her may use this access. How are you able to detect such an attack, such an affection? It's pretty hard. And most people don't because they don't even try. They don't look to. Because the way of thinking security is too much the system is running. There is no problem. I have access to all my data, all my systems are good, the production is good, all robots are working, it's all fine. Maybe. Maybe not. So how to detect cyber risks, how to detect that you have been affected by any type of cyber risks is what is about in this chapter. The fourth chapter is about responding. So of course, this is incident management, first of all, but nevertheless, we really try to encourage persons, but also enterprises and companies to think beyond incident management. Because if you're thinking about respondents procedures, again, think about the use case of a cyber attack at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. The IT guys responsible, they detect the attack and they know what they would have to do. But their countermeasures would be to turn off the production system, for example. So, are these IT guys that get their notification on their smartphone on a Saturday morning on 3 a.m. that something is bad in their data center, do they have the right to decide if they stop the production? Or do they have to call the CEO on 3 a.m. in the morning and ask, we have a cyber risk, shall we stop the production? And if the CEO is not picking up the phone at 3 a.m. in the morning, what do the IT guys do? Do they shut down the production or do they not? And we really want companies and also organizations to think about those situations. So make clear who takes this decision on 3 a.m. in the morning on a Saturday. Because you're losing time if you haven't decided at that time. If you need to find out the responsible person who has the right to decide if we shut off or not, then you're losing time. Do prepare those processes in advance. Do think about who do I need to take a certain decision. And do give your tech guys the right to do the stuff that is necessary. Give your tech guys more than just the right to secure the systems. Give your tech guys the right to take decisions. And last but not least, you have to be able to recover. So your data center was the victim of a fire, is burnt down. Your data has been encrypted by ransomware. What do? You have to be able to fully recover, which means basically precise backup processes are established. To play them back. How many of you have ever played back a backup on a running production system? 2. Nice. It's not enough. How many of you have ever fulfilled a backup or taken a backup but never played it back? 1. So all of you don't do backups. Okay. I'm going to reformulate my question. In which of these companies here have you ever tried to play back a full backup on a running system, on a productive system? Okay. Pretty good. About half of the room has. So, but this is not there where we want to be yet. We are facing too many companies, organizations that really running in troubles when they're trying to do that. So they do backups, they do incremental backups like every day after work. And once in a year, they suffer a situation where they should use their backups. And they realize, oh, this takes longer than I expected. And it has some funny behavior that I didn't think about. Okay. Maybe you should find out next time earlier. We would recommend that. So try it. Try your recovery process. Also, cybersecurity is not something that you should do after you have been breached or hacked. Prepare yourself. We're trying to give you tools to do that. So we're trying to give you a little bit more at hand to prepare yourself. And I'm way too fast. So please ask more questions. Wait. Yeah, I agree. Yes, it's true. It's a standard which is addressing basically the decision makers in the organizations and the enterprises. But if you're talking like the secure design of software or the secure design of hardware, there are better resources to check. This is not a standard which is particularly addressing the hardware or software producers, but more the IT and system administrators of companies. Is your critique what you want? Thank you. Well, I'm really interested in talking those discussions. So I just picked up a few phrases you said. Security by design, definitely a concept that should be taken in consideration. And also the other things, I would be glad to discuss this later a little bit. So I want to make this absolutely clear. This is not nothing new, and this is not the end of thinking. Security is a process. Security is not a state that you can achieve. Security is something that you will have to fulfill and execute again and again and again. The fact that you have been secure yesterday doesn't mean anything if a new zero vulnerability is discovered today. So security is a process. Security is not something that you will achieve. You are never secure. To bring this standard a little bit more to life and to going down from the generic part of it to a more detailed version, we have been working together with industry associations to come from the generic version of that standard to very designated versions of that standard that are really addressing the real life situation as it is in Switzerland. For example, the electricity standard really shows you the network that is used to distribute electricity in Switzerland in real. So this is just shows you the title of the electricity standard. And to give you a little bit an example, where it was in the general standard, we have generic information on how you should do things. In the more detailed version, we have things like that. Network matrix and communication tables for the Swiss electricity sectors. This is real. This is not something generic. This is really how the important companies in the distribution of Swiss electricity communicate their data. So this table shows you which port you should use, which protocols you should use to transfer data, which server is allowed to communicate over which protocol to which other server and stuff like that. And there's more to come. Right now, we are also working on the same type of standardizations for natural gas suppliers and for the public transportation systems. And we are looking out for the third one to be started this year, which is one of the most critical and most important sectors at all, which is the medical and healthcare sector, which is incredibly rough, to be honest, because you have thousands of vendors, thousands of different machines with proprietary code. So it's horror. And if you're talking cybersecurity in the medical field, I don't know, run against the wall. It gives you less headache. The next steps that we're trying to do is planning to set up a benchmarking database so that companies can compare themselves anonymously with other companies in the same field or in the same size or that are facing comparable cyber risks. So we want not only to give them an insight on where are they right now, but also some type of comparison to other companies to find out where could we do better, or where do our concurrents, opponents already do better. And, I almost forgot one of my most important messages. Right now, the Federal Center for Cyber Competence has been decided to be built. So our government decided that Switzerland shall become a new cyber competence center, which will basically result in a growing number of persons working for those three circles that I have already shown you on the entry of my presentation. But we will grow. We will hopefully become a little bit bigger, a little bit more powerful. And this means we need you. We need the tech guys. We need the experts on cybersecurity. And I really hope to attract you a little bit to the jobs that we are offering. Yeah, you're bored. We are not all of us are the board like federal guys. You don't have to wear a tie if you work at the office. Don't worry. It's pretty easy meanwhile as well. But I really would like to motivate all of you to stay in contact with us. Whether it is if you apply for one of our jobs or just if you share your experience from your business life. Also, criticism is very welcome because we know we do really believe in security as a process. Security is not a state. Security is something that has to be done tomorrow again. And if we could learn from each other, from your experience based in your daily life, in your office, and what we see if we compare different infrastructures in Switzerland, for example, we hope to achieve a mutual benefit for all of us. So I really would like to invite you to stay in contact with us. Just call me or one of my colleagues, meet us on LinkedIn, come by in Bern, say hi, have a coffee with me afterwards. It's easy. Stay in touch, please. And of course, you will have all those information later. So I will make this presentation publicly available. So if anyone wants to download it, just do it. You can also download all the resources that I have been mentioning here in the presentation. You'll find everything on our website to download if you need anything. Also, various Excel tools that you can use for self-assessments or stuff in your organization. Are there any questions?
So, first of all, thank you for the talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting.
Welcome.
You said it at some point there was identification, recovery, and detection. I think you were somehow harping on how to detect, and but many companies are running IDS or host IDS. So are you like helping companies with publishing IOCs that we can run on our system, or is that a good way perhaps to spread the wealth?
Well,
so
we from our office, we do not provide direct technical assistance. If you want direct hands-on technical assistance, you should address this to Melanie, to the Federal Melde- und Analysestelle für Informationssicherheit. I'm sorry, it was not me who developed that name. There's Sonja, there's another girl, Sonja and Melanie.
Because there are community rules, for instance, that we can download. I think that would be very useful. For instance, like if there, companies that share I think they detected an IOCs that we can run on every company.
You cannot download it. There's something that we call the closed customer circles. So for example, for companies in the electricity sector, we are running such a closed circle. For companies in the food sector, in the health sector, various others, where those companies can, from one side, profit from intelligence information that we get from the intelligence service, and on the other hand, they can exchange information about breaches, malware, whatever they detected on their systems. But you have to apply to become a member of one of those circles.
You have to apply to become one.
Yeah, you have to apply to, and you have to be of a certain importance, to be honest. So if you're having like 5 employees, you may not be as important.
Is there more questions? We got time for that.
I was just wondering, does Switzerland have an equivalent of the NIS directive?
Of what?
The NIS, the European NIS directive that came out.
For the electricity sector, you mean?
Critical national infrastructure covers.
We don't really have. Well, we adapted more like the NIS directive. We don't have something that is basically for ourselves. No, we haven't. But we have like the law, which my office is based on the law for critical infrastructure protection, but which is only for the protection of the services of the critical infrastructure. So we're taking over NIS directive if you want to.
Is there
other questions? Don't hesitate to ask any type of question later too if you want to.
You said that you were working towards building such a benchmarking database for companies to compare themselves anonymously, but at the same time you also said that you don't do direct technical assistance. So how is that only for the companies in those closed customer circles, or how's that supposed to work?
No, the database will be public. It will be a web-based tool, basically. So even then, you can use the database, but we will not help you if you're getting bad results. Yes.
Maybe a follow-up question.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm sure I can do that. As a follow-up, how will you ensure that like companies know about this and will fill it out? Because like benchmarking, to me, seems only useful if you have a certain amount of data, and if you only have like the 5 most important companies in each sector, how much does that benefit?
We are profiting from the work that we already have done during the last few years, that we already are in contact with as I said, like 250 persons from the private sector that are already providing us with their insight yet. But of course, it has a lot to do with sensibilization and awareness. So situations like today are for me a chance to talk about those things. And if nobody knows about it, we will not be able to gain useful information. You're right with that. I think that to answer your questions, how do we do that is we already do. We already stay in contact with the relevant companies in Switzerland. They know us and we know them, and we exchange information about various risks a lot of time, not only about cyber risks, but also on many other risks.
Do you consider some third-party companies, for example, for the medical system, for healthcare? You have a lot of providers to make an hospital or a company working well, and there's sometimes very often foreign companies. So do you integrate in your vulnerability analysis such third parties contributing to critical sectors?
We haven't done yet. Usually the insight that we get from the sector comes from that company's straight itself. So we're not talking to a third party consulting company, for example, but we're talking to the vendor from that machine, and we are talking to the cybersecurity responsibles in the hospital that are administrating that machine. So that's what we basically do. But we want to keep that information also a little bit controlled and secured. As you may imagine, it's not that helpful if we do full disclosure of all those vulnerabilities straight away. So we try to patch them first, or give the vendors the time to patch those systems, and then go full disclosure.
Is there any additional question? Then thanks for the talk.
Thanks again. Have a nice afternoon, everybody.